Hi, all dear listeners. Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. I'm joined today by Panagiotis Kriaris. Panagiotis is a very important voice in the fintech area. I've actually been following myself, Panagiotis, for several years on social media, and I'm sure that many of you have as well. But I leave it to him to introduce himself. So if you could please, first of all, welcome Panagiotis, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Hi, Ariel. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm Panagiotis Kriaris. I've been in the space of financial services for a few years. I would say background payments, banking, fintech. So mostly not mostly, I would say always on the business side, but with a strong correlation and understanding of the technology side. And as you very well know, nowadays, if you are not able to understand technology, you're not able to be effective in your field, especially in finance. So very happy to be here.
No, the pleasure is mine, and I would like to start by asking you if you could share a bit more about your background, because as you said, you are working in those topics, but at the same time, you do this important task when it comes to to creating content and explaining people things about digital banking and fintech in general. So, how did you end up where you are now? What's your background, in case my listeners don't know?
Yeah. So I've started, I would say, my career from traditional banking. But I think it has been also important for me being able to understand how banking is working, which is effectively kind of the basis of finance. What is the role of banks, and then using this as a basis to kind of go into the fintech space. I think that was quite, I would say, interesting for me and a very good experience. So, as I'd like to say, I've been working on both sides of the fence. So, working in the banking sector, and then cooperating with fintechs. Now being on the fintech side, but also working with banks or having them as clients or partners. So I think that this is a privilege of being able to have done both. And of course, as you very well know, payments has been getting a very big attention over the past many years, becoming much more important. I always say that the more payments are becoming more crucial, the more they get to the background and they become invisible. So I think these are also some elements that have been also shaping my experiences in my career in the space. And I'm trying to contribute as much as I can in terms of on helping people understand some of these concepts and mostly what's behind.
No, actually, I think that you are accomplishing your goal because when it comes to the content you create, which I think is very concise and interesting. And I think it's very interesting as well what you mentioned about your background both in banking and now fintech, which gives you this a unique perspective. And following this, I wanted to start our discussion talking about digital banking, which is a very hot topic like in most of the world. So focusing like on Europe, what does the digital banking ecosystem look like here in Europe? And also beyond Europe, what are your thoughts on the ecosystem as of now?
Yeah. Great topic, by the way. I would say when it comes to digital banking, you hear lots of definitions. We hear about neobanks, we hear about challenger banks, we hear about digital banks, and most of the times I think that these terms are used interchangeably. And although they are not exactly the same thing, I think the definition that I would use is that we are talking about a technology first approach that involves a flexible, branchless, digital native model challenging traditional banking. And the reason that the concept has been emerging, I would say, in the early 2010s, roughly speaking. Depending on the geographies, can be earlier, can be a bit later. But I would say there are kind of 3 or 4 basic premises that made this possible. The first one is what I call the decoupling. I mean, the technological innovation has been for the first time allowing, to decouple the front end from the back end, the infrastructure, right? And APIs becoming ubiquitous as the connecting rails underneath. So I think that was one of the main things, one of the main enablers. Then you have the rise of seamless end-to-end digital experiences. I mean, we have been seeing this in e-commerce, entertainment. So I think this has been acting kind of as a benchmark for banks as well. And then, of course, and I think we all kind of know this from experience, we had, and we still have, but we used to have big gaps in traditional banking offerings, meaning they were mostly, or very often non-transparent, complex to understand, expensive, inelastic. So it's a take it or leave it approach. I mean, this is what I have. If you like it, that's okay. If you don't like it, I'm fine as well. And I would say that the 2008 financial crisis was also acting as a kind of a springboard in 2 directions. One was the talent. So many people were laid off, and I think this was the opportunity for them to look for new opportunities. And then the available capital at the time, I think, was seeking an alternative. So lots of these people could also use this capital. So these are for me the main kind of assumptions behind the rise of digital banks. And then we can discuss, of course, about the models if you don't have anything else to add.
No, of course, please go ahead. Actually, I wanted to ask you one more thing before proceeding. And I think this is like at the very core of digital banking. And that thing is why? I mean, why do we need them? Because I know that many digital banks, at least in certain jurisdictions, they are struggling to break even to make profits. So, and especially from the standpoint of a consumer, what added value do they bring to us compared to, for example, traditional banks?
I think the added value goes to one of my last points. So I think there was a gap, as I mentioned, in terms of non-transparent offerings on the side of banks, right? I mean, expensive pricing, complex to understand, and the UX very, very poor UX. So I think these are gaps that the digital banks have tried to cover, mostly starting from niche markets, and they have been doing quite well. I mean, connecting now, your point to the previous point around how did they start? I would say we have 2 major models, and then can also discuss the differences between Europe and what has been happening around the globe. So the first one is what we call the greenfield, right? So you're having players starting from scratch. I mean, most of the times they offer a niche market. I mean, they identify a niche market or a niche segment that is neglected, we can say, by incumbents, and they focus on offering this seamless customer experience that has been missing, attractive design, competitive pricing, and then, of course, a digital or mobile first approach. I mean, you're using your mobile phone as the main point of contact. So I think this has been the strategy. In the early days, I think what we have seen is that we have this hyper-growth model, meaning that it was all about growth KPIs and metrics, and I grow 30%, 40%, 50%. That was the only important KPI that mattered. And then, of course, you have this ecosystem play, right? I mean, mostly driven by partnerships. So if you look at some of the most successful models, like I don't know, Revolut, N26, Nubank, these are typical examples. So I think that's, I would say, the most successful model. And then in Europe, I think you have these incumbent banks, so traditional banks launching their own neobanks, and we have many examples. I mean, Hello Bank by BNP Paribas, I mean, Boursorama by Société, and I think UniCredit has been also launching one. I think we have lots of examples, and basically the idea was that the traditional banks, they wanted to compete with the fintechs and retain the customers. So basically, they had the infrastructure, so they said, okay, why not? I mean, it's not easy for me to do it as part of my existing infrastructure, but if I do it on the side on the same terms, that might be successful. So these are the two models that we have been seeing in Europe. And looking now at the global, a bit more from a global perspective, I would say that the first one, the greenfield approach, is the same. The concept is the same. I mean, I mentioned Nubank in Brazil, one of the most successful digital banks. But I think there is a bit of a difference in terms of the second approach. I think if you look at markets like Asia, for example, you have this kind of large closed loops ecosystem players with a non-finance business with a focus on technology. Most of the times they have they were also very strong on e-commerce, and they were basically launching banking spin-offs as a means of converting and monetizing their existing client base. Most of the examples, I would say, they come from Asia. I mean, WeBank, Kakao Bank, but this was mainly due to the economy, right? I mean, in these markets, there was a lack of a robust finance architecture, and in effect, this was covered by these private big tech players, covering this gap. And I mean, WeBank has been, is owned by Tencent in China, right? I mean, it's China's largest social media big tech company. I mean, I would say the equivalent of Facebook, and they have been doing very well. So this is, I would say, probably the difference in terms of a more global approach.
Well, actually, now that you mentioned Asia and you talked a bit about China as well, I wanted to ask you about a different but not so different topic, which are super apps. For example, given my background in Asia, Hong Kong, and China, I used to have exposure to WeChat, which, as most people will know, started being like a messaging app, but it then evolved into much more this giant, which includes e-commerce, also financial services offered there as well. So I wanted to ask you about super apps, whether, I mean, how super apps differ to digital banks. I mean, what's the connection between them? Because I know that for some people, the concept of super apps may be confusing. And then I wanted to ask you as well, whether you think super apps can become an actual competition for banks. Like, what role do you think they will play in the future in Europe or abroad or across the globe?
I mean, very, very good question. I would say, going one step back, the reason why super apps have been very successful, and then it also very much depends on the geographies, but the main reason has been that they have been meeting needs on the UX side. So they have a great UX and lots of services meeting day-to-day needs, right? So, and I think it very much depends on who is controlling at the end of the day the customer relationship. I mentioned before that one of the main drivers of having digital banks and neobanks the way that we know them today is the decoupling that I mentioned. So you don't have the front end dependent on the infrastructure, right? And this has as I said before, has changed the game. And at the end of the day, I would say that the consumers are not interested in who is offering the service. So if it's a bank or not, as long as they can trust the provider and as long as they're getting the service they need. And if you look at Asia, for example, I mentioned before there was a gap and you had these super apps, I mean, the big technology players covering this gap. And I think that's very characteristic of how display can become a very powerful one and then can cover the gap in one market that is not, let's say, dominated by banks. And then on the other hand side, for example, if you come to Europe or if you, let's say, in other US markets where the definition of the super app is not the one that we find in Asia or in China or in Southeast Asia, for example, then I would say that the banks are more, I mean, they're more dominant as we speak, but doesn't mean that this cannot change, because at the end of the day, you have the platform economy, which is a new business model that we see it's very, very powerful, it's very, very dominant. And the customers, they have an expectation that they get the same kind of service that they find in their, entertainment, let's say Netflix, or in this in the big tech scene, in the shopping platforms, e-commerce. So they are expecting that they get the same kind of convenience and user experience that they find in these apps. And I would say most of the banks, not all of them, but are a bit far away from this model. And then you have the likes of embedded finance. I mentioned the platform banking, so the platforms. And then embedded finance means that I am embedding financial services in a different value chain that doesn't have anything to do with finance. So, for example, I buy a car and then I need an insurance, and the moment I buy the car, then I can also, for example, buy the insurance. Tesla is a very good example of this. Um, so that's changing the game, right? And then whoever is controlling the customer relationship, they can also dictate the play. So I think there is or there might be a threat for the banks from the likes of super apps that they lose, and they become kind of they get lost a bit in the background, and they just provide the infrastructure. And of course, if you're not the one who is having a customer relationship, you cannot dictate the terms, and then it's a bit of a different game. So that's why I think if you ask most of the banks, okay, what's your strategy? I think most of them are going to say, or are saying, that I would like to keep a customer relationship. The question for me is, okay, are you able to do so, and what do you need to do to be able to successfully transform a model that can do so? So that's for me the big question.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think this can happen? Like any ideas? Because I know it's a difficult one.
I mean, it's not an easy one, of course. And as I said, I mean, I would say that there are various parameters. So I think it has very much to do with how you embrace technology as an organization, right? I mean, if you're not able to embrace technology, I think you're going to have an issue. Now everyone is talking about the AI, right? So I think this is kind of indicative of the challenge that banks are facing. Then you need to adjust your strategy towards the controlling the customer relationship, which I mentioned before. So being able to act as a platform, or to partner with other providers that are following this model, I think is crucial. So if you're not able to follow this model, then you're probably going to have issues. And then, of course, it's culture. I mean, they say that culture, it's a strategy for breakfast. So whatever you do to kind of try to transform, if you're not able to align this top-down from a cultural perspective, it's not going to work. And I think that's not a bank-specific challenge, but I think in banks it's much more. I mean, it's much more astute, the challenge, and the need to act upon this.
Mm-hmm. Actually, related to this, you now mentioned this idea of banks embracing new technologies. So I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, how are banks, based on what you see, embracing new technologies in general? And especially, there is one like second question or topic I would like to discuss, because I saw in a post you made recently that you talked about AI banks. So what does it take for a bank to become an AI bank, and what's that as well?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I was writing about this recently, because everyone is discussing about AI and how it makes a lot of sense. But I think when it comes to, okay, what does it take for me to follow this model, then there is less clarity. So I would say that, let's say, if you're looking at the bank, and if you're looking at the AI journey of a bank, I think the first thing that they have to do, and for me, the first challenge is that they have to get their digital act right. And I mean, the bank, what I mean by this, the following, the banks, you take any bank, they have been spending the best part of the last at least decade, maybe longer, in things like digital transformation. I mean, ask any bank and they're going to say, okay, I have a budget. I've been, I've been doing digital transformation for quite some time. And the question is, okay, now I think they have to enter a different modus whereby the digital becomes AI. But digital remains the basis. So if you don't have the basics, then I don't think that you are able to, even if you say that you want to become an AI first bank, I think that's not possible. And let me mention two examples. So if you're not on the cloud, then discussing about AI doesn't have any meaning, because the cloud is basic infrastructure for AI. So that's the first one, for example. Or if you don't have a data strategy, meaning that if you're not able to produce data, and if you're not able to have meaningful data from your day-to-day transactions with your customers and analyze the data, so the so-called data analytics, then that's also something that is going to affect your vision and your effort in becoming an AI bank. So the first thing for me is to get your digital act right, as I mentioned before. And then I think you have the challenge of integrating the AI infrastructure as part of the organization. And then here, I mean, as you know very well, you have lots of banks that are running or on not very modern IT. So how do you integrate this? How do you match these two is a bit of a challenge. Then we mentioned culture before. So, okay, how do you retrain? How do you upskill your workforce? So it's one thing that I have the technology. It's another thing if I'm able to use it. So the IT side plus the cultural side, and then of course adjusting your entire business model. And I would say there is a fourth one as well, which is I mean, there are lots of risks connected to data protection, to compliance, to regulation. Put on top AI, and then I think you have a mix which is not an easy one to balance. So these are, I mean, the challenges, and of course we can discuss besides the challenges how one can go about implementing an AI model.
Mhm. Yes, and I wanted to ask you as well before that, what's the actual value for a bank to use AI and become an AI bank? And I'm asking this because whenever there is this kind of massive attention towards a new technology, I'm not talking about banks, but even about small startups, everyone thinks that they need to use this technology. It happened with blockchain at the start of the pandemic, for example, where like any startup I talked to, I tried to mentor, they wanted to use blockchain, even when you didn't see an actual use case for them to use it. So when it comes to AI, what's the added value for any bank to start using AI and become an AI bank in the way that you mentioned now?
I think I mean, I don't have, I mean, there are lots of numbers explaining the kind of difference that AI can contribute to the bank's bottom line, but not only. So, for example, I think there is an efficiency benefit, so that you're able to do things better. Then there is a benefit in terms of being able to be more flexible and be more agile and be faster. So you have a faster go-to-market. So you are able to react faster to the changes of the market, which nowadays are increasingly, I think it's one of the main challenges that organizations and especially banks are facing. And then I think for me, one of the main things is that you are basically able to refocus some of the resources from low value added work, menial work, let's say repetitive tasks that you're now doing, and you're employing people, not to release these people, to let these people go, but to focus on other higher added value stuff that are making the difference for the customers and are making the difference for the business. So that's why I'm saying that I think at the end of the day, and sorry, just going one step back. And you see this both in terms of the front end of the customer servicing, the customer relationships. How do you address the customer, and also on the operational side. So what I mentioned before, it makes a difference across both levels, front end and back end. So at the end of the day, if you are not able to do so, and then you have others who are in a position to leverage AI and technology in a much better way than you are, then even if your business model is more sound, then you're not going to be able to compete. So that's why it makes a lot of difference. And we can discuss about blockchain, but I think for the first time we see AI having a technology like AI that is not just a trend, is not just a very promising tool, but is something that is going a bit beyond. And I think that's, it's becoming kind of not a competitive edge, but becoming kind of the basis. I mean, you have to have a very specific basis to be able to do certain stuff, and then AI comes into the picture. So if you're not able to follow these developments, you're not gonna be able to compete effectively on the market.
Actually, you mentioned now something interesting when you talked about not just a promise, because it reminded me that I actually I've written a few academic articles, also on artificial intelligence, but also on blockchain in banking, specifically talking about the possible or potential use cases of blockchain in banking. But I remember that even though there are use cases, many of them are still what you mentioned. To some extent, they are somewhat a promise. You see that there can be a use case there, but they are not like used to a large extent. So would you say in that sense there is a difference between AI in banking and blockchain in banking, in the sense that blockchain maybe remains more like a promise, and when it comes to AI, you see more the actual use cases? Would you say this would be like a summary to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as you mentioned, that there is a difference. I think the main difference is when it comes to the speed, how things are moving. I mean, we can discuss about blockchain, we can discuss about smart contracts, we can discuss about tokenization, for example. I mean, there are lots of use cases, maybe more than than most people have in mind. So banks have really been implementing some of this. But the thing is that some of them have been, let's say, have stayed in the pilot phase, right? So they have not been able to move the needle in a significant way. And that's for me the main difference between what and not don't get me wrong. I mean, these are still very promising use cases, right? I mean, but the thing is that the blockchain as a technology per se is not very compatible with the idea of traditional banking. I mean, it's not. I mean, if you see, I mean, from a definition perspective,
True.
traditional banking systems were not designed with blockchain in mind, right? So if you're running on outdated legacy infrastructure, I mean, even let's say among blockchain platforms, interoperability is not always a given. And then you have compliance and regulation coming on top. So you have these kind of challenges, right? Now, when it comes to AI, I think some of these challenges, of course, exist as well, but not to the same extent. And I think the extent to which the extent to which we see things moving and actual use cases changing stuff and making a difference, I think that's I would say that's the pace of how fast things are moving, and I think that's the key, and this is for me the main difference between the two. So there is a theoretical part, let's say, in blockchain that still remains, and there is a promise that needs to be fulfilled to the full extent. And then we have use cases in AI, especially, I mean, especially when it comes to Gen AI, because as you very well know, AI is not, especially for banks and financial institutions, is not something new. I think most of the people, when they say AI now, they mean Gen AI, although we have to acknowledge that there have been lots of use cases before Gen AI. So this is where I think most of the difference lies.
I fully agree with you. That's as well what I concluded in my articles. And just before wrapping up, I wanted to ask you if you have any final remarks or thoughts that you wanted to share with my audience, given that we already covered pretty much all the topics that we had in mind. If there is anything else that you wanted to say before wrapping up.
I think we have discussed lots of very interesting concepts. I mean, and of course, time is always an issue. I mean, to be honest, I didn't even feel that we spent, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes discussing about these topics. But if there is one element that is coming across all topics, I think is technology and how much technology has been changing business, right? I mean, that's why we say, I mean, the fintech, financial technology, I mean, it's a term that embraces technology. And I think in all of these discussions, we see how much things are changing driven by technology, and how much banks and organizations of all kinds need to adjust to continuously adjust their business model as technology is changing. I mean, nobody was expecting, let's say, I don't know, a few years ago that we're going to have now Gen AI becoming all the rage, and then that everyone would talk about AI and how we are transforming the business based on this. And then maybe in a couple of years' time, there is something new. I mean, now we're discussing about agents, agentic AI. It's one of the big topics. So,
very hot topic.
I mean, things are moving in a very fast way, and technology is in the driving seat.
Mhm. Yes, I fully agree with your remarks. I think that everything is changing very fast. Like just before the pandemic, I think that no one would have imagined not just everything that happened with, for example, blockchain, etc., but also what you mentioned now about artificial intelligence, Gen AI, now these newer ideas of agentic AI, etc. And I'm sure that in 1 year from now, if we talk again, I host you again in my episode in case you have time. I'm sure that things will have changed a lot. So it's great to see things changing that fast.
Exactly. Yeah.
And well, thank you, Panagiotis. I would like to thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy person, so I appreciate very much that you could take this time to come here and talk with me and share these thoughts with my audience. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure that my listeners will learn a lot from listening to you.
Thank you, Riol. I've very much enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.
The pleasure has been mine, and well, to all my listeners, thank you very much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did enjoy recording it. And please stay tuned for the next ones and subscribe to my channel in case you haven't. Thank you very much and see you all soon.